Let's all breathe a collective sigh of relief. I'll tell you why, as it's time for another episode of... Hi there, it's Brett Hornby here. Welcome back to an end of the season version of my Calgary Stampeders this month. Regularly this is a end of the month thing, but I've decided that the regular season ends the first week in November, so I decided instead of doing a November end of the month here, I'll do two videos this month. One talking about the end of the month here at the end of the regular season, and then I'll do a bonus episode 7 for the playoffs. So this is episode 6. This is the last week of the regular season, and let's talk about the game that happened, and also let's recap and tee up the playoffs here. So, as I say, this game definitely breathed a big sigh of relief for Stampeder fans, because October, if you go back to episode 5 here, wasn't really a good month for the Calgary Stampeders, because they won a very, very ugly one against the Montreal Alouettes, and then they lost 3 straight to the BC Lions, Saskatchewan Roughriders, and then the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Mind you, both the BC and Saskatchewan game, they lost that one by 5 points, and then they lost the Winnipeg Blue Bombers by 8, so it's not like they got blown out. But it kind of got a little concerning there, because A, they had a chance to wrap up first place and clinch first in the West, and it took them all this time. And then B, we were playing against teams that we would potentially face in the playoffs. And then the pressure really got ramped up when the Saskatchewan Roughriders beat us last month, which meant they took the season series, and they got the tiebreak if by any chance Calgary and Saskatchewan tied, because both Calgary and Saskatchewan had home playoff dates clinched. But if we had a tied record with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, they get home field advantage in the tiebreak and get to host the Western Final. And that was the motivation of avoiding having to play that extra game. And then if we were planning on going to Edmonton for the big game, to go to Saskatchewan, and going to Saskatchewan to the playoffs it's like going to hell there. It's going to be a very hostile territory, but fortunately the Calgary Stampeders definitely responded against the BC Lions. This game happened on Saturday, November 3rd, with an 8 p.m. kickoff. It was the last game on the CFL calendar. It was Super Saturday, but for Week 21, this game only had real playoff implications, because if you go back to episode 5, a lot of the bracket was already decided, except who was going to host the Western Final, and the Calgary Stampeders had to win this game if they were going to host the Western Final, and then either wait for Winnipeg or Saskatchewan, with Saskatchewan hosting the Western semifinal. And that's exactly what happened, and Calgary responded in a big way, especially in the first half. I mean, BC, they still dressed a lot of their regulars, because I think they were trying to give Wally Buono one last win, because the coaching legend decided he was going to retire after this season, and finally it was against the Calgary Stampeders for his last game, actually his first game back in 1990 when he became head coach of the Calgary Stampeders. His first game was against the BC Lions at BC Place, and that game actually ended in a tie, of all things. And I might make a tribute video to Wally Buono I wouldn't say I have established a series yet. It just worked out that Jerome McGinley announced his retirement and Nick Lewis announced his retirement at the same time, and once I started getting more active on YouTube, it might be an occasional series, but it'll be an off-season thing where I'll pick Calgary sports legends and do a tribute video on him, and I think I'll do one for Wally Buono in the off-season on the coaching legend. But it was his last game coaching in the regular season, and the Calgary Stampeders, thanks to Wally Buono for everything he's done in the CFL, but the Calgary Stampeders came to play knowing that they should still wrap up first in the West and get a bye bye to the Western Final and not have to worry about going to Saskatchewan in the playoffs if they were going to go all the way to the Grey Cup. Plus, I think they need that bye week to figure out the funk that they were in October. Also, the fact that get more practice time with the receivers that they do have that's available, because that's been the recurring theme this season is all the receiver injuries. So anyway, back to the game. Saturday, November 3rd, 8 p.m. kickoff at BC Place. The Calgary Stampeders won convincingly, especially in the first half here when I get up my notes here. But they won this game 26-9 against the BC Lions. Actually, Calgary was up 25-0 after the first half, and after the second half, the BC Lions, well, they knew coming into this game they were going to Hamilton next week as the crossover team to play the Hamilton Tigercats, regardless of what happened in this game. But the Calgary Stampeders needed to win more, and they definitely responded, and they were dominant in all facets of the game, especially in offense, defense, special teams. They made the field goals when it was time to make the field goals, and there wasn't too many big returns, but neither on BC's side. So Calgary's special teams covered Chris Rainey very well. But what stood out, other than this being Wally Bono's last game as head coach of the CFL, was that Calgary was all dominant. They answered back after losing 3 straight, and I kind of count that Montreal game as a half loss because Calgary looked awful that game, but Montreal had a weak offense that day, and Calgary's defense still sacked Johnny Manziel 6 times. But Bo Levi Mitchell was 20 for 32, 278 yards, and threw a touchdown. He definitely had a lot of that in the first half, and then the second half was kind of a defensive struggle, and also the fact that BC played more of their backups in the second half, knowing the game was law of the hand and know they were off to Hamilton either way. But the one other key thing that was baked in Calgary winning this game, that BC won the game here last month, is that we won the running game. Is that Don Jackson had 11 carries for 91 yards, and then Chris Matthews, who's been a nice pickup this past month, provided some receiving depth. He led the way with 67 yards on 3 catches. But Markeith Ambles received another touchdown, 4th game in a row that he's received a touchdown. This guy's definitely been a nice find, nice find rookie late in the season that, could be big for us in the run to the Grey Cup. We'll see what happens. And then Bakari Grant, who's been on the team for the last couple of weeks, he actually made his re-debut and made a few. It was a balanced attack. Chris Matthews led the way with 67 yards, but everyone got about 30 or 40 yards in receiving. So, it was a balanced receiving attack, which I still think that could be a strength for the Calgary Stampeders, especially with some of these new guys and veterans making their re-debut in the CFL. But, that was the offensive side of the game. Defensively, Alf Singleton, Jameer Thurman, they were all over Travis Lulay and Jonathan Jennings and Terrell Sutton, the running game, and Micah Johnson had a sack too, who he definitely led the team in that category. So that's pretty much the game in a nutshell. We definitely dominated against the BC Lions and responded and finally get that Western Final locked up, and let's breathe a sigh of relief that we get to enjoy next week, get to enjoy watching football next week, and bring on the Saskatchewan Roughriders or Winnipeg Blue Bombers on November 18th at McMahon Stadium. So that's the game. So I'm going to cover more about award nominees and some stats here, and then of course let's tee up the playoffs here, and as I plan to do some playoff preview videos here for the 5 games, the semifinals, the finals, and then the Grey Cup itself. But these are the team nominees that every team gets to submit their award nominees, and here's who the Calgary Stampeders have nominated for award nominees. And then I think what I'll do is that when I get to preview the Grey Cup, I'll go over the finalists, when the league names the finalists, and then the Thursday before the Grey Cup, the players get, they have their award ceremony. So I think when I do my Grey Cup recap video, I'll go over who won those said awards. But these are the Stampeder nominees. So for the most outstanding player, Bo Levi Mitchell, I'd say he's been the steady quarterback, one of the top quarterbacks in the league. He's threw over 5,000 yards in the season and led the league in passing touchdowns, and the fact that all the receiver injuries too, so you're still able to get all that done. I mean, there's times that he's looked ordinary, but every quarterback has their bad games, but definitely no argument on Bo Levi Mitchell getting the most outstanding player nominee for Calgary. Defensive award, that goes to Michael Johnson, who led the team in sacks, so was definitely a force. I mean, he was one of the players that made Charleston Hughes expendable, but there's definitely tough competition on Michael Johnson if he's going to get to be named the final, especially when you have Charleston Hughes and Adam Bighill in the same conference, but we'll see how that plays out. Canadian Alex Singleton, once again, he led the team in tackles, and I think once I get to the stats here, I might actually say he's led the league in tackles once again this year, and I mean, you had to be able to spread out the player awards. Alex Singleton could have also been the defensive, but this way, he recognized the sacks and the tackles here, since Alex Singleton's Canadian. And he's a Canadian because I believe one of his parents has a Canadian citizenship, because he's actually from California, but then he actually went to school in Montana, so he's close to being here. So maybe it was fitting he was going to be a Stampeder. So offensive lineman Derek Dennis, who I believe he won the award in 2016 as a Stampeder. He definitely looked back and forth on left tackle with the Calgary Stampeders. He was one of the big off-season signings, and big part of the offensive line that protected Bo Levi Mitchell for the most part and opening holes for running backs. And then special teams, Jameer Thurman, who definitely led the way in special teams tackle. I mean, once again, you could have nominated him for a defensive player, but Alex Singleton definitely had more tackles, so it's one way to recognize him. I mean, you could have thrown in Terry Williams with 3 touchdown punt returns, but it's always a debate with these awards. And then the rookie was Trey Roberson, who was very versatile on defense, and once in a while he actually was used for returns. So I mean, no one really stood out for rookie that made it obvious, but those are the Calgary Stampeder nominees, and we'll see how when they get to the finalists the league decides after they go through all the team nominees there. So anyway, let's recap the standings here in the West here. The Calgary Stampeders finished first at 13-5, and then Saskatchewan Roughriders finished second at 12-6. Winnipeg was 10-8, and then BC and Edmonton both actually had a 9-9 record, but the BC Lions got fourth in the West over Edmonton because BC won the season series, because there was that big win a couple weeks ago at home when the BC Lions beat the Edmonton Eskimos. I think it was 42-32, and that was huge because that actually clinched BC a playoff spot because they took the season series over the Edmonton Eskimos. So definitely, the West was definitely much stronger than the East here, as you can see, because out East, the Ottawa RedBlacks were 11-7, followed by the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who were 8-10, and then the Montreal Alouettes were 5-13, and then the Toronto Argonauts. They really definitely fell off the card after winning the Grey Cup last year with a 4-14 record. So to tee up the playoffs here, while both Calgary and Ottawa have a bye into their respective finals here, and then when I go back to the BC Lions crossover, because the BC Lions at 9-9, who's fourth in the West, had a much greater record than the third place team in the East, Montreal, at 5-13. So BC crosses over and takes that playoff seed. So to tee up the playoffs here, and Sunday, November 11th, is when the East and West semifinals happen. The Eastern final, which we knew last week, the BC Lions go to Hamilton at Tim Hortons Field. It's 11 a.m. kickoff for 1 p.m. Eastern here. That's the Eastern semifinal, and then the Western semifinal, which got decided after the game that I'm just recapped here. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers go to the Saskatchewan Roughriders at Mosaic Stadium. That's at 2:30 p.m. kickoff for 4:30 Eastern. I'm on Mountain Time, so that's the semifinal weekend. The winners of that will go to the finals. So the finals, as we know, the Eastern final, it's either going to be the BC Lions or the Hamilton Tiger Cats. They'll be going to the Ottawa RedBlacks at TD Place Stadium. That's Sunday, November 18th, 11 a.m. kickoff for 1 p.m. Eastern. And then the Western final, which will either be the Saskatchewan Roughriders or the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They'll be taking on my Calgary Stampeders at McMahon Stadium. That'll be at 2:30 p.m. kickoff for 4:30 Eastern. And then, obviously, the winners of the East and West final, they'll be going to Edmonton on Sunday, November the 25th. That'll be at the Brick Field at Como Stadium. That'll be a 4 p.m. kickoff. So we'll see who goes there. And I plan to make some recap videos to previewing each of the playoff games, which I plan to have those out by Thursday or Friday the latest. So that's teeing up the playoffs. So let's quickly look at some player stats here for the Calgary Stampeders on the phone. I'm just doing this on the fly on the phone here. I like using Google Docs now instead of trying to jot down my notes and being all over the place here. But let's just bear with me for the stats here. So if you look at the player stats here, I mean, Bill Levi Mitchell, obviously, as I mentioned, he threw over 5,000 yards and led the league in touchdowns. And for the season, he was 356 for completions over 585 attempts, threw for over 5,124 yards, 35 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, which is pretty good touchdown to interception ratio, but his completion percentage was actually only 60.9%, which is a little lower than usual. But I think Bo does a lot of, he seems to like to do a lot of long passes. I mean, his yards per game average actually is 284.7, and his rating is 99.3, and he had 3 games over 300 yards, so still pretty good. I'd say still a pretty good season overall, which warranted his nominee for most outstanding player. And then for rushing, Don Jackson actually had 924 yards on 160 attempts, 3 touchdowns. But the incredible thing with him is that he was hurt for a third of the season, so he almost ran for 1,000 yards. He had 3 games for over 1,000 yards, or 100 yards, excuse me. So, I mean, he still had a pretty good season. The other running backs you can mention is that Romar Morris. He had 376 yards on 78 attempts. He had 4 touchdowns. I mean, he definitely he's definitely been a nice backup. And then Terry Williams, another option that Calgary has. He had 242 yards on 46 yard attempts and a touchdown. And both Don Jackson and Terry Williams and Romar Morris almost have a 5 yards per carry average. So, I mean, if you can get second and mid, that definitely keeps the playbook option open. Receiving, this is definitely interesting because Kamar Jordan still led the team in receiving. He had 944 yards on 55 receptions, 6 touchdowns, but he had that Labor Day before he got hurt, and there's questions out there as, well, you get to actually play again. And then Devaris Daniels, who also was out for the season and missed last quarter of the season, he had 747 yards on 50 receptions for 7 touchdowns, which actually led the team. But in terms of receivers that played all season, Johan Breskison actually had 567 yards for 35 receptions and 3 touchdowns. So depends which way you can look at who led the team. I mean, Jordan led the team, but he had that at Labor Day, and then Eric Rogers had just under 500 yards on 36 receptions, and Reggie Bagleton had 408 yards on 25 receptions, and Mark and Michelle had 435 yards and 31 receptions for both Rogers and Michelle had 5 touchdowns, but those guys were hurt for a good chunk of the season. So, guys that recently picked up and broke out, this last month here, Markeith Ambles actually had 306 yards on 28 receptions and 4 touchdowns, and then Chris Matthews has 252 yards on 12 receptions with a touchdown. So, I think we definitely have some options for receiving despite the big names being hurt. And then if you go on the defensive side of the ball, Alex Singleton had 122 tackles, and Jameer Thurman had 82 tackles. Both are, up there in the team lead. The next closest guy was Jagger Davis with 59 tackles. But then for sacks, Micah Johnson had 14, which was up there with Charleston Hughes. I mean, Charleston Hughes was on a surfing, tearing pace there in the first half, and then he slowed down. But, guys like Jagger Davis had 7 sacks, and James Vaughters had 5 sacks. I mean, it definitely made Charleston Hughes expendable in the offseason. So then when you get to the kick returns here, Terry Williams had 550 yards in kick returns. This is just the kick returns, so it's the punt returns that I think will really stand out here, is that Terry Williams on the punt return, on 54 returns, he had 710 yards and 3 touchdowns, which definitely stood out. And then Romar Morris in 409 yards and 33 returns, he had 1 touchdown. So, definitely have a threat back there on the punt return, which that was definitely a question mark coming into this season, which was who was going to do it after Roy Finch got into some trouble and his football career is on hold, and we don't know if he'll ever play football again. But he got into some trouble in the off season that he has to sort out. But and then when it comes to field goals, we were pretty good on field goals. Rene Paraday's 91.1% percentage at 41 out of 45. But there was that Lewis Ward guy in Ottawa who I think he has made like 50 field goals in a row there. I'll have to look at the stats when I get to the previews there. And then Rob Maver averaged 46 yards punts, which, the yards look good, but Rob Maver is still, pretty good on getting into field position and, getting in the coffin corner there. So this is definitely my Calgary Stampeders this month, episode 6. I had more time to tee up the playoffs and go over some player stats that getting into the playoffs. I still think it's cup or bust for the Calgary Stampeders this year because, it's nice to be the cream of the crop of their regular season here, but it doesn't mean as much if I'm not seeing the trophy here. There's definitely going to be some tough competition. I'll put this out here that if the Calgary Stampeders aren't going to win the Grey Cup, I'd rather they don't get to the Grey Cup than get to the Grey Cup and lose again, because those last 2 years were tough losses for the Calgary Stampeders. But we definitely, despite, I still say Calgary did a little youth movement in the off season, and I still think they played a little better than I thought they would. There definitely was some surprises. It's the fun of making predictions. I made my prediction at the start of the season, given my mood on the playoffs and how each team was looking, and I originally said it was going to be Edmonton over Toronto for the Grey Cup, and both those teams didn't make the playoffs. But then I revisited it and at Labor Day, and I did say Calgary over Ottawa, but even then there were still some teams that got hot and cold in the second half. Look at Saskatchewan and Edmonton, and Winnipeg was practically written off at after Labor Day and going into September, and then they've had a strong October. So wait for my previews, and I'll to go over my previews and make my pick'em style picks where I think I'll say this team will win with this much confidence. That's what I plan to do for my pick'em here. But I'm definitely ready for another run for the Grey Cup. I'm off to Edmonton here in a couple weeks either way. But it's still cup or bust for the Calgary Stampeders. I mean, we'll see what happens here. But once again, they were the best team in the league, and it was fun recapping them throughout the season. I mean, last month wasn't as fun to cover them, but I gotta try to be impartial too and provide you all the information. I mean, thanks for all you guys that watch, and look forward to my other content for the playoffs, and plus, when I cover the hockey and lacrosse and personal vlogs and that. So make sure you hit like, subscribe, and follow my channel, and I'll see you in the next video, and enjoy the run to the Grey Cup here. And there'll be a bonus episode 7 when I recap how the playoffs went, hopefully as champions. Hopefully there'll be 2 games to recap and we win both of those games. But anyway, I'll enjoy the rest of this weekend here. I got a couple more videos to make, and I'll keep enjoying the hockey, and I'm ready for another run to the Cup. So I'll see you in the next